I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Our guest this episode, long-standing ethical citizen and business owner Marc Choyt, shares about yet another shadow-filled pocket of our business-as-usual human operating system. In this episode of the Poetry of Predicament, Marc Choyt speaks about the lie of conflict-free diamonds and other toxic elements of our global jewelry trade. Help me welcome Marc Choyt. All right. Well, I'm really kind of surprised and very pleasantly surprised to have been introduced to our guest today, Marc Choyt, who is I actually don't know how you'll introduce yourself, but I know that you're involved, Marc, with the production of jewelry, of really the fine art side of jewelry for people to be able to purchase and wear and have in their lives. And what really, that usually wouldn't have you be on this show because I don't know anything about that and really don't
Right.
have a huge interest or focus on it. But what grabbed my attention when you were introduced to me was that you have taken an extraordinary stand to have some way of informing the world that what we think is now a sustainable industry, or at least a less aggressively destructive industry, ranging from blood diamonds on the one end to the fairly well-known downside of mining for gold and virtually every other element that's involved in what you do. You have taken a remarkable stand for an integrity and for truly a sustainability in this. And why again I'm having you here is I've worked for years in the training business and the executive coaching business, and every once in a great while, there would be a little waft of concern from the errant executive or manager who all of a sudden had a pang of conscience somewhere in their in their world. And again, it was very rare, and it was always a gift for me to be able to have those conversations because there is still to this day such a devastating lack of integrity and lack of this kind of really broad and deep look at what we're doing as human beings on this planet in the business as usual paradigm, and how we talk with ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves about those processes. Really, we don't think about it much. We go to the grocery store, we get meat wrapped in plastic, and on the list goes. And I'm particularly fascinated to hear your stories of your particular field, because there's almost no other field that is as firmly wrapped in our stories of how good we are, how good human beings are, and we give jewelry because we love someone else, and it's all good, and this represents our love to another, and on the story.
Exactly. Yeah.
And unfortunately, there in the center of it is the same kind of shadow
Yes,
that we're
exactly.
now having to grapple with on a global basis, one small fraction of which is actually climate change, and somehow
Right.
it gets the top billing these days. But I think what you're soon going to be pointing us to is how this and your particular stance and research into this is as desperately in need of integrity and our awareness as any other part of the business as usual culture. So, Marc Choyt, thank you for sitting through my long semi introduction of you. And if you wouldn't mind, please fill in the gaps of what I didn't say about your, what brought you to this art and this work, and then what took you even further into this level of integrity. So, Marc, welcome.
Thanks so much, Dean. And I think that one of the most fascinating things about looking at the jewelry sector is actually this gap between the sourcing of jewelry and how we arrive at a piece of jewelry, and the metaphor of how we use jewelry as symbols for our most noble human aspirations, as you said. So this gap between sourcing and symbolism is really one of the most profound kind of windows to look into what we are doing and what is happening in these times. And I'll talk about my background in a second, but I just want to add on to that. During the 80s and 90s, there were 3.7 million people, Africans, who were killed by wars funded by diamonds. And diamonds are really one of the keystones of the entire jewelry sector.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened between 2001 and 2003, once this was discovered by Global Witness, was there was this whole process that was put into place called the Kimberley certification scheme. And this was put together by large diamanteers, by UN, it's a broad treaty, and it created the words, marketing terms, the basis of the words marketing that are it's called conflict-free diamonds. And it was also supported by NGOs, specifically Global Witness and Partnership, our Africa Canada, which is now called Impact Canada. And so you had all this incredible civil society watchdog. Now those NGOs, what they did was they gave these companies a pass. There was never any restitution. There was never any truth and reconciliation. There was no one ever held accountable for what actually happened to those people. And so essentially, Kimberley certification process has become very, very meaningless. Conflict-free diamonds doesn't cover human rights abuses. It doesn't cover child labor. It doesn't cover 100,000 cutters, child labor cutters in Surat, India, where 90% of diamonds are cut, and they're losing their eyes after a period of time and then discarded. So there's a whole, it doesn't cover the rapes and human rights atrocities in Zimbabwe in 2011 in the Morange fields. So essentially, it's this very, very narrow definition saying conflict, war. And it basically is a false narrative. And it has become, and they knew it when they were doing this. And the NGOs thought, well, and even myself in the trade at that time thought, well, this is a step. But actually, it was kind of a Faustian bargain, because there has been really no change in the diamond supply chain significantly since then. And what we have is this notion of conflict-free diamonds, and it is no ethical basis. And that is just sort of a good way to start to look at this whole thing. Because without that really going back and dealing with the impacted communities, dealing with the restitution, bringing those people who perpetuated the crimes, the paramilitary groups who they hired, in front of those people whose arms are cut off, who are victimized, without that kind of human dynamic, we aren't going to see any real change. There has to be some kind of transformational and aspirational thing that happens. And then I think we could have something where we could begin to really look at what is the most altruistic way to look forward and move forward and create a diamond sector that actually benefits these producer communities. And so I'm just starting there as an example of how I think about this. And no one else in the trade, people may secretly agree, but nobody else has come out and said we should ban conflict-free diamonds, because conflict-free diamonds that notion, 99% of people really come to my store and say, oh, if I tell them the diamond is conflict free, they're like totally cool. This is just one kind of segment. Now, that I think it's a good way to look at this stuff to start out with. And for myself, I'm not really a typical business person. And so I came into this industry not by inheriting a family business or something, but coming from a very strong social justice background and highly environmentally concerned. And for example, my dad was a really strong civil rights activist, and I grew up in a very, very political environment. And then I've had really decades and decades of work on meditation practice, and I spent 2 years in Haiti as a volunteer working in Mother Teresa's clinic. So I had a different, and I live like, I grow a lot of my own food. I permaculture my yard. I mean, the whole thing. I'm a fairly countercultural person in how I view things. So I came into this industry with those views, and for a while I was very much in the center of the ethical sourcing movement. And what happened was the pioneers, particularly in this country, who would kind of launch a real authentic movement. And by authentic movement, I would say that it has to be linked to improving the lives of the producer communities, the people on the ground. That's what I would consider an authentic movement, and supporting them to do best practices and supporting them to actually create kind of a regenerative economic base that they could feed their families, alleviate poverty, and reduce global mercury toxicity. So that's what I'm aiming for. That is the stance I take. Ethical jewelry has to focus on these producer communities. So I've basically tried to work within the sector. All my colleagues went to taking a radical center position, and my opinion is they were co-opted, and they really didn't get anything from being in that radical center. And so as a result, I read for months, for years, I was reading all this misinformation on what was actually going on in the jewelry sector in terms of this new ethical sourcing movement, because ethical sourcing is now the hot trend among millennials. And I saw that it's full of misinformation and distortions. And so as a result, I spent my background and my educational background is in writing and more than jewelry. And in fact, I'm not a maker of jewelry. My wife is a really good jewelry designer, and that's how we started this company. Basically, she and I just went at it, and I basically went around the country cold calling sales. But because of like what I was seeing in the industry, and because I've been involved with ethical initiatives, I launched the first ethical jewelry blog in 2006 or 7, and followed these issues really closely. I felt the need to write this expose, so I wrote this expose, ethical jewelry expose, lies, damn lies, and conflict-free diamonds, and published it as a open source document on the internet, hoping that I would get some kind of, be able to raise some kind of issues, and more or less, there are very few people who paid attention to it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your interview show and actually get a chance to talk about it. Does that kind of answer your primary first set of questions?
It does. Thank you. Every once in a while I think, well, geez, I've heard all the dimensions there are to hear about our unconsciousness, our collective unconsciousness,
right.
And the deep damage that is continuing to be done at an ever growing exponential level.
Right.
And then, another door gets swung open and I get to experience something new. And so that's really what I'm hearing from you, Marc. And, I'm curious, perhaps you saw, if you looked at my website or, heard about the stuff that I usually focus on, what really my body of work is about, excuse me, is is really who will we be together in the face of this growing predicament that we're in? The quality of presence that we seem we seem to have forfeited. We seem to have thrown out the window the notion of our right relationship with other people, with the earth, the quality of our presence rather than the constant fixation on extraction, consumption, profit, and so on. And it seems like, you know, in this conversation, we've already landed right in the middle of all that. And if you don't mind, just a little loop through
Sure.
that territory for a moment. I'm curious because it sounds like you've got some experience in. There's kind of a buzz phrase going through my work these days called deep adaptation. In other
Right.
words, not adaptation like adaptation to climate circumstances, like
You get what you're saying.
building
I can fill in the
seawall.
blanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
So not
This is
building a
really a
seawall
struggle.
around Manhattan, but
Yeah.
really the inner work of
Yeah.
adaptation. What is the inner work we need to do if we're intending to in any way be conscious as we step forward, even into a predicament-laden world? There's still the opportunity for us to be open-hearted. There is still the opportunity for us to return to right relationship. And I hear that you've got some experience, you've got some track record with that kind of inner work in your past, not to mention your stand for, you know, various kinds of justice issues and so on. And if I could ask you on the personal side, how's your heart? How you doing in the face of such a daunting field that you've been describing?
Um, that's a really good. That really gets to the heart of things, so to
Yeah.
speak. It's well, I think presence is something that presence is something that, oh boy. um, I'll say that working on this material, and I'll say that I've got a lot of tools, right? I okay, I've been sitting um, Tibetan Buddhist practice since almost pushing 40 years now, and and I think that, or I feel that, it's really about a willingness to be present with what comes up for me.
Mhm.
I have to say that there were a lot of times when I was working on the manuscript, like I would just have this endless grief. I would have this well of grief. In the middle of it, uh, I did a Joanna Macy workshop, and she came to Santa Fe, or actually outside of Santa Fe, and I basically wept for two straight days. And so I'd go through these processes, and also I've just been diving into social justice issues. I've been reading, or during when I was writing about it, I was going really deeply into James Baldwin and other people. And I studied, I'm brushing up and I'm trying to understand historical continuity. Right now I'm focusing on Reconstruction period, but I don't mean to be avoiding the question. What I try to do is I work with my emotions and I honor them. And what comes up is, like, even now, like, there's a lot of frustration with me personally. I feel a lot of futility because I've put this work out and I've tried to contact huge numbers of journalists. I've tried to do all this outreach, and I have someone my collaborator who's an intern who's really smart. and and I was hoping, you know, that we could somehow get some anchor with what I'm doing. And although there are signs, like there are some people who are up in high up positions who have looked at it, and I don't doubt that it's getting some influence, but in a lot of ways, it hasn't bounced back at all, even to my company. And my company, I've spent huge amounts of time in this in my company, and my Kimberley company, which is has a really strong, beautiful product made ethically sourced, fair trade gold, etc. Hasn't really benefited it, and so there's a struggle on that level. There's a struggle on what it's made me understand too is, and empathize with more, is like the length of time that it takes to make change. That I have to recognize that I have to work as the old story in the Gita between Krishna and Arjuna says, you just do the work and you don't have to work for result, because the result is not necessarily up to me. What I can do is I can do the work, and I can say I'm going to really create this anchor of truth as best as I can, and try to bring this perspective forth. But I cannot do anything more than that. And I also have to learn to, a lot of times I'm motivated by really strong emotions, and sometimes that comes out of my writing, and I have to take those emotions and I have to put them in a circle of relationship, and I have to think strategically about what is the most effective way I can express these things to that people will hear, and that will bring about some kind of change. And I also have to pay attention to where are the opportunities for change. Where is the place that my work might be able to fit in, or my view might be heard, and I might be able to express and inform people in context to this project that I'm on. And then I also have to say, well, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Maybe maybe my work in this area, which I've been working pretty strongly for the last 15 years, is concluding, and I got to move into this other body of work that I have outside of this work, which really informs this work, which is a book that I'm writing called The Circle Manifesto, which I've almost completed, and I've been working on for 15 years, which really looks at the system of circle behind sustainability. Because fundamentally, we talk about sustainability, but we don't really understand the principles of circle. And one of the principles of circle is this notion of radical equality, that we are no more equal than other living creatures, that we're all equally essential to this whole, that we're not better or worse. And we're not only living creatures, but like plants, animals, mountains, we're all equal essential to this intricate whole that we have. And so I feel like I don't really, I feel like I'm often on no ground. I don't really feel ground. I don't know what my ground is. Of course, at the same time, I have to balance this all out. I mean, lately I've been feeling kind of blue about, like, wow, this project isn't moving forward and I'm not getting the results I want. But on the other hand, I'm living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have this extraordinary spring this year, which is really wet and cool. I'm surrounded by beautiful community and like-minded people who I love and enjoy, and I've got just an awesome life here, and I can go out and bathe in the forest, which is right outside. And so I have, you know, like, one has to balance. I have to balance all these things with, and at the same time, all those things, all the beauty I realize, like, I know that the forests that I walk through, that the bark beetle is going to come down and wipe it out, because I've already seen that happen just 2 hours from me. And so the forests are going to go through major changes, and so it's all passing away. It's all passing away, but life is passing away. Life is passing away, and so there's no fundamental difference between my understanding that I'm going to die, that everything I've done is going to change, that everything is changing around, but life will continue. It may not continue, because the earth, We are just a nanosecond on the spot of the earth, and it is going to, there will be something after us, and we will continue in some other way. But it's all passing, it's all transient. So I've tried to explain just sort of some of the, oh, and then I'm very, very disciplined about connecting in and doing practices that connect me deep in to essential, what is essential, and what is essentially beautiful, and what is essentially true. And so I do that I do that as a discipline. So
Yeah.
so it's a very kind of complex mandala to try to be as awake as I possibly can and do this work and feel all the emotions and feel frustrated. And when I was younger, I came a lot more from this place of anger and I'm going to bat this thing down. And now being older, I just feel like, what's the opportunity here? I can't force it down. Is there some opportunity for gentle persuasion here? I just don't want to fight anymore. I'm just tired of fighting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yes, it makes sense. And more than that. So thank you for doing that loop. That's kind of familiar territory in my neck of the woods in this body of work, and I so appreciate. What I'd like to do is just take a moment and let you know that I see you.
Thank you. I feel it. Thank you.
And you know, every once in a while, I let myself just touch into what's at the center of any of these conversations that I'm blessed to do in this podcast or in workshops, or in this work. And I'm just kind of reviewing some of the things you've shared with us just since we started talking, and the scale of what you're aware of, what you've been holding in your heart since moment one when you got involved with this particular type of work and field. You mentioned that more than 3 million people in Africa have died one way or another, peripheral to this extraction of various minerals and gems and so on, for the creation of things that are beautiful to look at, to wear, and so on. And it is just one. It happens to be one that's quite visible, but it is just one of thousands of examples of how we entertain ourselves, how we dress ourselves, how we feed ourselves, and on down the list goes. And what I hear you asking for is for others to pause a moment instead of staying in the rapid fire hamster wheel of the business as usual culture that just self-justifies, and just take a look at what is actually happening, and to let down the artifice, let down the propaganda that is really just designed to keep everything moving, keep the profits coming in, and to keep the awareness of the actual costs as far from the public eye as possible. So it's none of what you've just shared about when you feel discouraged, or when you feel like you just need to break away and become present to the beauty that is all around you, where you live, and so on. I'm so glad to hear that you have the depth of practices that you have. I know for myself, without my practices, I would not be alive right now.
I feel the same way. I totally feel the same way.
Yeah.
And in a way, like, it's almost, for myself, I have to be able to access a lot of different experiences of a whole range of consciousness. It's consciousness that is even like consciousness without presence of who I am, or like consciousness of grounding in like luminosity, clarity, and spacious mind, heart, you know. And I think that like the cultivation of those practices is foundational to everything that I do. And there is no way that I could possibly survive without that profound well. And what it is it's all around us. And this is what I know to be true. Like, this is all around us, this incredible potentiality of what may happen. And so to me, it's not about hope or no hope, or that I'm not really in that. To me, it's like, okay, this is my life. How do I bring forth what I have to contribute to life
Mm-hmm.
as best I possibly can, and to support relationships that are regenerative to ecology, and create more ecological diversity and create more cultural diversity. And because it's in this diversity, in this incredible is the incredible possibility of new outcomes. And I feel like, and so when we lose our species, we lose our diversity. When we lose our indigenous languages, indigenous people, we're losing our diversity. And we need this diversity, because diversity is what makes life beautiful. And we need this diversity also. It also is what we need to survive. And so basically, it's a very, what we're talking about really are like my edge states, like the edges that I'm my learning edges, that how to navigate these issues, and how to apply, like, and keep, how to not even apply, but how to be present, and in a way that most is most deeply connected and rooted in all that we're related to around us, and the trees, the plants, this, and respect and love for all these things, and participation in it. So these are really the big these are really the big, we're right in. And I had a feeling this might happen when I was reading a little bit about you. I had a feeling that this might be different than other podcasts I've been on, that we might get right to what is essential here, that how do we deal with the crux of living in these times which I believe we were born to be here at this time, for this moment, so that we can be here. And in a sense, like, I never thought I'd be in the jewelry world. It's kind of, it's weird I'm in the jewelry world. My dad was in business, but I never wanted to be in business. I'm not a natural business person, and I don't, because a natural business person has that kind of focus, and that's their priority of values, and so that brings a certain type of outcome. And I have a different focus, and I've had huge business disasters because of my different focus, and fallen flat in my face. And somehow I'm still here, and still with my wife. We've been together over 30 years, and I still, so, but this is really the crux of what we're trying to circle around here, is really the crux of living in these times, as trying to be as awake as possible, trying to be a change agent, trying to hold these views that allow the possibility. And for me, it also comes down to like, well, how can I, like, if it's like, it's frustrating because like fair trade gold, which I'm the only fair trade gold jeweler in the United States, and there's 250 in the UK. I mean, it could literally, if it could take off here, reduce global mercury contamination. It could alleviate poverty for hundreds of thousands of people. These are really amazing things that could happen, and yet I can't get any traction with it, and I can't even get another person to join. And there's a whole slew of things that I could talk about, but it's like I just have to accept what is and what I can do and what I can't do. And oh, and I want to say one more thing. Like I don't feel like, okay, it's really important strategically. Like I had this conversation with this person yesterday. It's really important to recognize everybody thinks that like these other actions, like in the political sphere where people are battling at this level, and there's this kind of incredible, well, we know what it is, but there are other actions. The real power is in the yin, is in the receptive, and all these things that are really destructive are going to play out in our culture. And who is going to anchor the beginning place? Who is going to anchor the place where we're starting over with this principle, and we're going to hold this intention, and this intention for that is based upon our decisions, based upon our deep connective relationship to all that is. And we hold those intentions, and we anchor those intentions, and we try to do holding those intentions for the future, for the next generations. Because if we don't plant these seeds, then when everything falls apart, well, everything is falling apart. As things fall apart, what are people going to look? So even though it may not seem like that things are happening, or that there's so many problems politically, we all have our own list. We just have to open up the paper every day and look at them. We can still hold these yin points. The feminine starting point is the most powerful point because it initiates the beginnings. And if you listen to the stories, like indigenous people stories, or even many teaching stories, it's all about how do you start over? How do you start over? And so in a way, like those of us who are working for change in our time, we have to really hold those positions fiercely, because in the winds of everything else, and we have to look and see the work we can do. And there's value in all that work. I was talking to someone yesterday, and she said, well, I'm not doing social activism, and she's not doing it because she's not in that realm of social activism. She's not. But all of us have a place that we can hold, and we can create that change by living with the knowledge that we are all deeply connected and intimately connected with each other and with the world around us and with the great circle of life and this great web around us. We're all deeply connected. And when we act from that place as much as we can, and we all fall off and we can't do it at all times, but if we can act from that place, then we are doing our work. We're doing what we're, if that is your work, for me, that's my work. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm doing my work, even if I do have all these emotions around the suffering and the grief cycles I might feel, whatever. It's just, I'm not getting anywhere. But just even having this conversation, which I've been having similar conversations with other friends in the last couple of days, friends who know me well, it's helpful to me to really just speak out loud what I'm feeling in my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing that, your willingness, your clarity that is so essential. A friend of mine calls it coming together as things fall apart.
Yes.
And, what I'm appreciating about your layout of this is, this is as devastating a topic as just about any that I end up talking about in this work.
Right.
And yet you're quite a capable exemplar of somebody who really is listening to your calling, and listening to your calling and bringing the skills that you've been crafting for years, that allow you to stay present in the face of massive stressors. That's no small thing. So for you to be able to hold that note, to hold that vision, that engage with that core calling, and to keep checking in. What is true? What is true now?
Right. Right.
It's not a dogma. This is something that you're present to, moment by moment, day by day, conversation by conversation. And it may be something, it may morph into something quite different next week.
It might.
I'm sorry to be, I'm not trying to psychologize you, but it just seems like that's what I'm present to when you're sharing what you're sharing.
It's true. It's true. There isn't really ground. I mean, the ground is, there is, well, I don't want to get too much into too deep metaphysical thing here, but yeah.
Well, suffice it to say, when you first brought it up about that, feeling no ground underneath you as you continue on in this calling, the words that came to me is that one aspect of this body of work, again, is that if not the business as usual culture and all that it's built on, then what? And the then what is what the average person is terrified of, which is the groundlessness, is the mystery.
Right.
Because we are
Right.
terrified of the mystery, and we've done everything we can to squash
Yes,
the
absolutely.
mystery, to take on, how often have we heard in the business reports, the market doesn't want to know about uncertainty, I
Right.
got to get the uncertainty out of the picture, when clearly that's what's killing us. Is we have killed the mystery. We've disengaged from the possibility, the immense possibility that is the other side of that mystery. And in so doing, we've committed ourselves to a predicament-laden world, one that we're heading faster every day down this alley toward the brick wall that is just waiting for us. So I hear you sharing and disclosing about the discomfort of that floating, or that groundlessness. And what I would say is that is actually a skill set.
I would say so too. It's a real skill set, and it has to be practiced. Well, I don't know. Honestly, it has to be practiced, but even as a skill set, I mean, we're still living. Yeah, we're still living in our bodies and who we are, and so yeah, and I just want to clarify that groundlessness still. I mean, it's not entirely groundless, obviously, because I still have my house. I have my I'm in relations with people, but I feel like the shift has to be, and this is why it's so difficult, because like if you look at a circle, everything is equally important, and if we look at like the idea, the history of our ideas, the history of our thoughts, it's always anthropocentric. And I feel like it's very, very difficult for people to shift out of the anthropocentric, their view that humans are the highest, the humans are the wisest. I mean, if you want to look at examples of altruism, there are plenty of examples in nature of keystone species acting in altruistic ways that are acting for the benefit of the whole. And what is it going to take for human beings to learn that they have to act like a keystone species?
Yeah.
as opposed to saying, oh, well, we're better than beavers because we can write symphonies and we can, whatever we do as human beings, or, like we can be or better than wolves, with impact on Yellowstone, how they, the whole study of wolves and Yellowstone. So I won't get into that. That's a different subject. But what is it going to take for us as human beings to realize that we are given our gifts, but we have to use our gifts to live in proper relationship, and those cultures that lived in proper relationship and put that in the center of their value system have been completely either vastly marginalized or wiped out and destroyed completely. Mm-hmm. And so it isn't for us now to go to those cultures and say, oh, lead us. We've got to find our own way of doing this, because our own sense of indigenousness to place and our own sense of connections, and we have to find ways. And if we don't, what happens is we make a set of choices, and the sort of choices we're making are going to lead to a set of outcomes. And the outcomes, so the question is like how devastating, how much loss does it have to be, how much pain and suffering does it have to be because of those outcomes? And we've been, and civilizations have gone through major transformations like this over time. I mean, in the mid 1340s, there was the plague, which wiped out 60% of people, and then that birthed the Renaissance, actually. So we could see there are all these possibilities of myriads of things of what could happen. But regardless of all this stuff, this future state should not stop us from working with conviction to do what positive change, and to plant these seeds, and to create regenerative economic models, and to try to connect, like what I'm trying to do is like try to create the producer community so they're not eating mercury, and their kids aren't working in mines, and they're supported to live decent, dignified lives, and connecting that to a market which because people want to have that connection. It's entirely possible, but it's being stopped by these neo-colonial forces that we might as well trace back to Vasco da Gama and his trade down Africa, searching for slaves and gold back, what is late 1400s. So the amazing thing is about this time is working with. Okay, I want to say one more thing. Like there's a way of looking at things. Like it's like a way of understanding that we're always, if we follow what's in our heart, we're always stepping into blessing, because what's in our heart is blessing. And if we're following that, we're stepping into that blessing. And so we're always in this blessing. We're always in this blessing. If even when it's really hard, I try to, sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but I think it's important not to stick to one perspective, not to get stuck in like, in a war, not to get stuck in the war of trying to change things, but to also spend a lot of time in the Odyssey. In other words, don't get stuck in the Iliad, but but be in the Odyssey. Like we're in the Odyssey. And Odysseus was a very wily person, and he's a good example of mature masculine consciousness in my point of view, and from an archetypal point of view. So yeah, I think I've probably said just about everything I know.
Well, I so appreciate.
We haven't talked about jewelry, but we talked about it.
Well, it may be not directly, but I think those who are smart enough to watch this episode, if they've been tracking with us, they've, in fact, this is where I wanted to land with you, because I can feel the envelope of our time together is closing. I myself am curious, and I'm willing to wager that there are other people who are watching and listening that are curious. How can I engage in some small way from my one person, one consumer here in the world, how can I engage in a better way with the whole jewelry industry as you've laid out? It sounds like there were a couple of major points that you've been making in your manifesto and in your activist efforts. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can be at least more informed, and if there are any useful alternative directions we can go for suppliers, for
Right.
conscious jewelry producers, or those who supply the materials? Any links that you'd like to give us in that direction, I'm happy to include here in the show notes. What do you got?
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go through a list of things. One thing is that one of the things I'm doing in order to get grassroots understanding of fair trade gold and support for it is I'm giving 20%. If you're a nonprofit organization, or anyone listening knows a nonprofit organization, and they want to work with our company, we'll give 20% of sales generated from that network back to that nonprofit. Because like I'd like to see my company work on a basis of like Newman's Own, where they generate massive amounts of profit to social justice organizations and things like that. So if anybody knows it has any connections in the nonprofit world that would be into that, that would actually help me survive as a company, and it would also help spread the network, because I'm not playing the pay-per-click, paying for social media. I'm not playing that game. I just don't want to put money to those companies. So that's one thing. Secondly, if there's anyone who's a journalist out there, I wrote a real strong expose in my ethical jewelry expose on the company Brilliant Earth. And Brilliant Earth is a company that dominates the ethical jewelry world. They get over 1 million visits a month and to their websites, and they're doing a lot of things that I feel are really, really harmful. And they have the potential to be like a Patagonia company, but actually they are an arm of the mainstream jewelry sector and working in collaboration. And the notion, one of the notions is beyond conflict free for diamonds. That's like, that to me is reminds me of like a banality of evil term, because how can you be beyond conflict free when you haven't done restitution and truth and reconciliation for the perpetuators? So that's like, there's a whole bunch of things about Brilliant Earth that I would love a journalist to pick up and do a really serious investigative piece. The third thing is, if anyone is out there who has any influence in some of the nonprofit world and could connect me in with some of these people who are working on policy issues. I had a conversation with Sierra Club that might be promising, but that would be another thing. Oh, if anyone out there has any access or could introduce me to other blogs or radio shows or other ways I could get the word out, that would really, really be great. Because again, like, it's very hard for me to break through to basically get a chance to speak about these issues. That would be one more thing. And also say, like, yeah, I mean, if you're going to buy jewelry, you should really support those companies that are actually able to provide gold from small scale mining sources. And I'm the only fair trade gold jeweler in the country, so that's my company. There are a few other companies doing this program called Fair Mind. It actually has the same standards as fair trade gold at the mines themselves. There's a whole slew of reasons why I'm not associated with that, but in terms of helping the producers, that's good. And so any of these things would be really, really helpful in terms of publicity, or even in terms of people like helping me spread the word about these issues. They're very serious issues. Like jewelry, it's not just about jewelry. This is a social justice and environmental issue. And it's also about finding alignment in ornamentation. And so I feel like it's really, 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 really big struggle to do what I'm doing. And I really have put out, like, a lot of people from my community have said, oh, like just praying for like flow and ease. I would like to find some flow and ease and release some of the stress points.
Mm.
And just being able to, and maybe that's not it. Maybe the message is that this isn't going to happen and I need to do something else, or I need to change my tactic or reduce the size of my company. We're already pretty small. We're just basically 4 or 5 people. So be it if that's the case. But I really would, just because of the enormous suffering of these people in producer communities, and to think of all these children eating gold, and I mean eating mercury and bathing in mercury water, and all the fish and animals and all these things. I really would like to see fair trade gold take off in this country. There's over 250 fair trade gold jewelers in the U.S. I'm the only one. I mean, excuse me. Let me restate this. Over 250 fair trade gold jewelers in the UK. So in England, it's taking off. It's a major movement. In the U.S., it's basically I'm the only one. We have an action we can take to actually change the people's lives, and we need to create a new jewelry story. And this is just a small thing. I mean, we may think jewelry is just a small thing, like compared to climate change, but it's not. It's about extraction. It's about the extraction industry. It's about the gold in our cell phones. It's about the gold in our technology. So this is a wide-ranging issue, and we need to get the truth out and start to send some economic benefit to these producer communities, so that they can actually live dignified lives, and they don't. Anyway, maybe that's enough. I'm just.
Okay.
Maybe I've said everything I can about it.
And what if people wanted to connect with your business? Do you have a website that they can connect with?
Yeah.
Is it easy to contact you through that website?
It is, and the website is Reflective Jewelry. You could. Are you going to put it in your show notes? Maybe.
I am.
Show notes. Yeah, you could put that in the show notes, and it's Reflective Jewelry. You can just search Fair Trade Gold Company USA, but it's Reflective Jewelry, and there's various all the emails off that site end up going to me, but so info, or you could just put my name, MARC at Reflective Jewelry, and if I don't get back to you, it's probably because I didn't get the email. So I do respond to all my emails if people have questions or concerns.
Okay.
And yeah. So.
Well, Marc Choyt, I sure appreciate your, just meeting you. I love that we were introduced by a mutual friend, and I'm a big fan of following threads that just show up for no apparent reason. And I feel like I've learned so much, and I have such a deep validation of the whole notion of finding what we love and then finding a way to bring that into the world through an activated sense of presence, as you are obviously doing. It's really been a joy to share with you, and I appreciate your willingness to really share intimately, that this is not an easy thing. This living and walking this path that we all are in now, humanity's never had to do this before, ever. It's not that bad things haven't happened on large scale. It's just
Right.
so much larger than anything that has ever happened in human history. And you've really brought us by sharing your life and your what matters most to you. We've gotten a sense of what a person can do in the face of having no guarantee whatsoever of making a difference or things turning out any particular way. That groundlessness that we were talking about, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're left with is our spiritual core. And I really appreciate you sharing yours with us today.
Well, I really appreciate wow, I appreciate this conversation. It's so much in so many ways. It actually feels, it's very affirming. I appreciate you seeing me, and that's really rare. I One of the things I talked to about the person who connected us was that these days we're having, and I feel she was, and both of us felt, we're having conversations where we recognize each other much more quickly, and we get into the essence of things much more quickly than we ever had. And so it was because of this conversation I had with her that resulted in where that happened, which resulted in this conversation with you, and where we really did have a very big understanding of who we each are even before we started, and we could dispense with having to find that out and get right to the essence of things. And so I'm very, very grateful for all the work you've done to be the person who you are and you are becoming, and it's very beautiful. I see you too, and maybe someday we'll get to meet actually in person. If you ever come out to my way or I'm out your way, and we can have more of a conversation. I'll get to look outside your window and see where all that beautiful bird sound is coming, because that's a very alluring sound to me. I'd like to see what's out there.
Yeah.
And so I just want to express my gratitude that you would have such a podcast where I feel like we really did touch upon what is essential, what is most essential, and what is really edgy and beautiful and terrifying and all that is. So just hope that you stay blessed, and thank you. Gratitude.
All right. Well, thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.